All right, welcome back. So by this point, you've been learning some pretty powerful tools, some amazing concepts. I know that you by now will be seeing the benefits of them by noticing how a different way of thinking, a different way of being is impacting your life in a positive way. And this week is so exciting. It's all about getting it to stay, evolving. Where do you go from here? I know I've talked about this before, but so many people learn something or gain a tool and then they just kind of forget about it. In 6 months, it's like they never made a change. And that is the opposite of what I want for you. And so I've really put so much value into this week. Maybe you thought, oh, this is just a wind down. No, there is so much this week. So get excited about it and make sure that you follow through right to the end, because this week is not only going to teach you how to keep the things that you've learned in this course alive, it's also going to teach you incredible tools and habits to keep anything you learn really alive and keep it going and keep growing so that you can keep expanding, because expansion makes us happy and you deserve to expand into your absolute best life. And it's funny because I'm actually a little bit sick right now, and I've been a little bit sick leading up to today, but it was kind of the most fortuitous thing because it gave me the opportunity to practice everything that I preach, and I really do, but also as a way in to talk about one of today's topics, which is that it's not about being perfect. And I can't emphasize this enough. I've even been interviewed by other psychologists, and they've said, but it seems like you have things so figured out. My dog is just here. They'll say, it seems like you've got things so figured out. You must always be happy. You must always be perfect. And that couldn't be further from the truth. I still have negative thoughts. I still get upset. I still, react sometimes in a way that I don't want. But the difference is that I have the tools, I have the coping mechanisms to move through all of that quickly. And I can't emphasize this enough. It's not about being perfect. If you think that all of your feelings are just going to disappear, or that you're never going to have a negative thought again, you're not setting yourself up for success, because you're a human being, and human beings have all of those things. What makes it good, what's good, what we're looking for is that you're able to move through it. You know what to do. Instead of something happening in the morning and making you mad and it carrying through for the rest of your day for 2 days, it happens and you move away from it, right? And there's going to come a time, I guarantee you, there's going to come a point in your journey where you wake up one day and all of a sudden a lot of that junk is back, and you've got this negative self-talk. You don't feel good, and it's suddenly something that's become very easy over time will feel like a lot of effort. That doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean it's not working. It doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It doesn't mean you're forgetting. It just means that that day is the day to take your attention to that, even if the whole day has to be about just stepping back and having these little chats with yourself and reframing everything. That's what you do. Because remember, we're never not doing, we're always doing something. And if you just let that day happen and you go with all that negativity, then you're kind of starting to build that habit again. And so you want to take that day when it's hard and do the work. And many people will say, oh, it's so easy for you because you have this and you have that, and your life is really nice. And it's true, my life is really nice in a lot of ways, but I did so much work to get here, and it's really easy for people to forget about that. And I can tell you, so many people will say, well, if my life was easier, then it would be easier for me to think like this. And I am telling you, I am absolutely telling you, I know this to be true from my lived experience, from the experience that I see from my clients, and also everyone that I've studied with has said this in some way, in their own way, and that is that when you think differently, your life will get easier. We say all the time, well, if my life was easier, then I could think differently. But it doesn't work that way. Think differently and your life will change. That is absolutely a fundamental rule. I've seen it in my life. I see it in my client's life. I've heard it. I've seen it. It is absolutely the truth. So don't tell yourself a story about if only. Decide, I'm going to do this in the face of whatever difficulties I'm facing. So one of our superpowers in keeping all of this going is going to be converting what we've learned into understanding rather than memory. And school, in many ways, has set us up for not success with this because there's such an emphasis on memorization, right? We had to memorize a list of things and then recall them on a test. But you see, memorization is not really how the mind works long term. It's understanding. And if you think back to, any story that you remember from when you're young, when I think about it, my mind goes to the story about the lion, Leo the late bloomer, or maybe, the ugly duckling. Do you remember the whole story? Do you remember all of the plot points? Probably. Do you remember the names of the characters? Probably not, but do you remember the gist of it? Do you remember what the story is about? Do you remember the lesson? Yes, because you understood it. Same with maybe something you haven't done a long time in school, maybe something from science or chemistry or math. Do you remember the exact details? Do you remember everything? Maybe some things that you really practiced, you do. But there's other things that you remember the gist of it, you remember the concept because you understood it. And when we convert things to an understanding, we can remember them forever. And so understanding is going to be a big thing that we're going to talk about this week. One of the ways to understand something is to talk about it simply, many different times and many different ways, which is something that I have done for you throughout this course. There are concepts that are, some of them are actually different, but the gist of it is really the same. Even some of the tools from the emotional week and the language week, they are a little bit different, but the idea is the same. And so in doing this every day and reflecting on it and going through and kind of thinking differently, you've already been understanding rather than memorizing. And so that's great. We are going to take this a step further though, and we're going to use something, a psychological phenomenon called the protégé effect. And what the protégé effect is when you teach something to someone, it reinforces it for you. And I experienced this when I was younger, when I was a dance teacher. When I became a dance teacher, I got so much better at everything related to dance because you have to think about all these things that you've been taught and sort of reorganize the information in order to explain it. And you can't just sort of have it half memorized. You've got to really understand. So when we teach something to people, it really, really helps it sink in and deepen our understanding. And now you can go and teach this to a person or talk about it with someone. I actually encourage you to talk about something we're going to talk about on day 3 of this week. But what I love to do with the protégé effect is to just imagine, because we know how powerful the mind is at visualizing, is to just imagine, because then you're free of the other person's biases, the other person's reactions. The last thing you want, is to say, oh, I've learned all this stuff about mindset, and them come back with something negative or not really listen or change the story to be talking about how their grandma, doesn't listen to them or something. We really, 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 really want to focus on this and go through it as much as we can. So what I want you to do today and over the next 3 days is each day we're going to summarize one of the weeks. I'm going to summarize it for you because that is another way that we learn, is just kind of like revisiting information and simplifying it. But I want you to imagine that you're teaching someone, teaching a course, giving a seminar on a stage. You can do it when you're out and about. You can do it silently in your head. You can speak without making sound, or you can have a full-on conversation out loud. You can do it in the mirror. It doesn't really matter. But I just want you to imagine. I want you to take a good amount of time and do this. And I want you to just imagine. So today we're going to summarize language. So today you're going to go through this sort of thought experiment, this imagination of giving a talk and teaching someone, people, imaginary, whoever, about what you learned. And I want you to just, really get into it, really have this sort of conversation with yourself as though you're teaching it to someone else, and teach them the most important things you learned, how it changed your life, give examples. And all of that is going to wire it in for you so much deeper. Really, really do this. I use the protégé effect to 10x how quickly I learn things. I became a professional photographer and was teaching people that were way more experienced than me about color grading in less than a year. And one of the tools that I actually used without really understanding what it was this. I've used it in everything that I do, the protégé effect. cannot talk enough about it. So have that conversation, do that visualization, and imagine that you're teaching someone. So what do we learn about in week 1? Well, we named that negative critical voice in our head. And the most important part of this is just that recognition of that voice isn't you. It's not reflective of who you are. It's not reflective of your dreams, your innermost thoughts, your vision of yourself. And so just keeping with naming that Kyle, that Nancy, that Karen, whatever you named your voice, just remembering that that's not you. Keep labeling it and realize that voice will never go away, but it will get much quieter over time. Number 2, describe what you want rather than what you don't want. If you get lost in a story of what you don't want and describing all the things, then your mind reacts as though it's real, and then it really takes you down a road that you don't want to go. So instead, focus on what you want, acknowledge the present, and then start to move away from it by describing what you want, telling the story of what you want and who you are. Remember that incredible director's chair exercise, and you have your true self vision. You can continue to add to that, to update that, to change your statements of truth. We kind of get bored of them after a little while. Actually now, it's been almost a month, so now would be a great time to revisit that, maybe change some of those statements of truth, update them, add to them, because if you never change them, they sort of become unstimulating and they don't mean as much to you. So you can always be, changing that around and playing with it. We learn to speak about ourselves in a way that we're not constantly giving away our power. So saying thank you instead of sorry. And really the global concept there is to just not be always apologizing for ourselves or describing why we have to do things like we're powerless, but taking back the power, being in command and control of our lives, our presence, the way we operate. And that feels really good. And finally, reframing that. If you were to summarize that whole week down into one concept, I would say that it's reframing. Reframe every situation. This is the worst thing ever. No, actually, this is an inconvenience and I can move through it. Being sick, I was like, oh, this isn't great. But then I thought, it's perfect because people are always saying to me, oh, you seem so perfect. This is not real. Well, here I am. I'm sick. I was super in my head about it at the end of last week because I didn't really know what was going on. And then once I realized I was getting sick, I was just like, okay, well, this is what's happening. And it's great because I can talk about, my perspective of dealing with that. And that's real. The reality is things are going to happen in our life that are not always exactly what we want, but that's okay because we have the choice of the meaning that we attach to them, of the story that we tell ourselves. And of course, reframing that into not even just more positive, but just putting things in perspective, is just so, you've already experienced it. It's so powerful and so so powerful and so freeing. So keep that reframing going, because if you master reframing, it will absolutely change your life. So you're doing amazing. I'm so excited for this week. Keep going, because this week is going to absolutely set you up for long-term success. So today, make sure you have that conversation with yourself and pretend you're teaching someone, and go back, say, what did you learn in week 1? What did you learn about language? What does that mean to you? How would you explain it to someone? Maybe you'd use totally different words. Maybe you'd use different analogies. Maybe you have your own stories and examples. I'm sure you do by now. So use that, because all of that is going to reinforce and help it go deeper. You're doing amazing. I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.